So today I'm going to talk about Albert Camus' essay Myth of Sisyphus. Albert Camus was a French Algerian existentialist philosopher and writer. He was also an atheist, and in his essay from 1942, Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus explores the fundamental philosophical questions of number one, is life worth living? And then number two, right, what should I do about this, right? How do I grapple with the absurdity of life? So kind of the philosophical question of suicide is explored here. Now, when you think about the term suicide, right, it sounds scary, it sounds really depressing, and Albert Camus is in no way condoning suicide, but he's just asking this philosophical question of, insofar as life has no inherent meaning, what do we do about that, right? Should we continue to live our lives? Is life worth living? And if it is worth living, how do we make it worth living as a human being, as a person who has free will? So, the myth of Sisyphus, in his retelling, he is describing what happened in this ancient Greek story about a really bad human being named Sisyphus who was punished by the ancient Greek gods for trying to escape death. And he was punished to basically carry up a boulder up a hill, yet it always comes back down. And this punishment is infinite, right? So this is futile, it's painful. No one really wants to do that for the rest of their existence. But this is what Sisyphus was sentenced to do because he was being really bad and he pissed off the gods. So in this story, Camus wants to illustrate how life can be futile, right? Life can be absurd. There is no inherent meaning. What at least many philosophers prior to existentialism considered objective truth, right? Camus felt that that's impossible. So there really isn't a clear or intrinsic order or structure to the world, and that's absurd. What's also absurd is that there is no God, and so we have to figure all of this stuff out, right? We have to figure out how we can ascribe meaning to our lives since there is no inherent meaning. And so that's why that philosophical question of suicide is present here. What does someone like Sisyphus do? What do people who are in futile situations do? And that describes so many people, right? The idea that you wake up, you go to work, you work 8-9 hours a day, you come home, you eat, you sleep, and you do the same thing at least 5 days a week, right? And then the weekend is when you can do what you want to do. And so without being conscious of that, right, we kind of just fall into a rut and we're not fulfilled. So the purpose of Sisyphus is to convey how can we still find meaning and cope with the absurdity of our existence. And that's why at the end of Camus' retelling of the myth of Sisyphus, he says, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. We must imagine Sisyphus laughing and conscious of the absurdity and the hopelessness of the situation, right? But he still recognizes that he has the ability to still enjoy something about his situation. So we as human beings, right, even though we have these kind of repetitive jobs, we have these repetitive things we have to do every day, like clean or, do laundry or things like that, right? That doesn't mean we should commit suicide. What it means is that we still have the ability to ascribe some sort of meaning to the situation and to laugh at it and to still find happiness. So even though life doesn't have inherent meaning, we still have the ability to kind of make light of it and to still enjoy life. And so that's why, from Camus' perspective, we should not commit suicide, because that is kind of just negating the absurdity. It is doing nothing to really improve the situation, right? So what improves the situation is being aware of the ridiculousness of everything, being aware of the wariness we experience, being conscious of what we're going through, but at the same time trying to make the best of it, basically, right? Trying to make the best of a hopeless situation. And so it's absurd to continue to find intrinsic meaning. It's also absurd to try to ascribe life after death, because we don't know what can happen. And also Camus is coming from an atheistic perspective. So the most important question philosophically is what we can do right now in our current lives, and how can we understand happiness in light of the absurdity. So that is how Sisyphus is kind of this absurd hero, because he is sentenced to this terrible penalty, and at the same time, we must imagine him happy as a way to cope with the situation and as a way to ascribe meaning to an inherently meaningless life. And that is basically the story of the myth of Sisyphus and Camus' retelling of that story, right? We kind of have to get away from objective truths and objective ideas about meaning, and we have to ascribe our own ideas to our lives, our own meaning to our lives, while not assuming that it is divine or set out by a greater authority.